you got off lightly. Back then, of course, HIV was a death sentence. The first thing they said to you was, do you have your funeral arrangements and do you know you're going to die?
In the past decade, things have completely changed for HIV. New medication means that people who are living with HIV can't pass it on to anybody else. But currently, people living with HIV can potentially go to jail if they don't tell their sexual partners their status before having sex without a condom. So why are so many of us still so scared of HIV? And is it appropriate to prosecute people for not disclosing their status when they can't pass it on? A lot of stigma and misinformation that exists around HIV stems from homophobic rhetoric from the 80s.
I don't love homosexuals. As far as I'm concerned, you can stay in the gutter. We do not want homosexuality legalised. They're looking at the homosexuals. Don't look too long. You might catch AIDS. All right, thank you very much.
I remember a very early conversation I had with my mother. I had lost several friends in a very, very short space of time. I think it was about 7 friends in 3 months. And she arrived to my place, to me in tears, and said, oh, what are you upset about? I said, listen, I've had 7 friends die in 3 months. 1 died this morning. And not one of them reached the age of 30. To which she said to me, oh, don't be so ridiculous, don't be so pathetic. They all deserve to die of AIDS. That's God's punishment on them. Everybody knows that. All gay people deserve to die of AIDS.
Since 1981, there have been 40 million deaths relating to HIV/AIDS globally. But around 2008, really effective treatments started to become widely available in New Zealand, and now people living with HIV can live long and happy lives. When someone is diagnosed with HIV today, they get put on a series of daily drugs called antiretrovirals. These make it much harder for the virus to multiply and spread to other cells, reducing the amount of HIV in the blood. This makes the virus undetectable, which means it's at such low levels it can't be passed on to anyone else or detected in tests. If you had to put a percentage on it, how effective is the treatment?
100%. There have been lots of studies over years with thousands of patients who have HIV infection and who are on treatment and their virus is undetectable and they never transmit it.
Is HIV treatment more effective than condoms?
Way more effective than condoms.
There's also a daily pill people who aren't living with HIV can take called PrEP, which stops you from contracting HIV. HIV works by taking over your T cells and using them to multiply. But when you take PrEP, the medication protects your T cells and stops HIV from taking over if you do come into contact with it. And so how effective is PrEP?
100%. 100%.
HIV doesn't just affect gay men. 1 in 6 people living with HIV in New Zealand are women. It's estimated that 3,600 people live with HIV in New Zealand, around 2,900 of whom are on treatment, which leaves roughly 700 undiagnosed and at risk of passing the virus on to someone else. There's still enormous fear and stigma surrounding HIV. In New Zealand, under case law, people living with HIV can be prosecuted under the Crimes Act if they don't tell their sexual partners their status before having sex without a condom.
So if you're diagnosed with HIV in New Zealand, you're required to disclose your HIV status to sexual partners unless you take reasonable precautions to protect the other person. And at the moment, reasonable precaution only includes using a condom.
Why are condoms recognised as reasonable precaution but antiviral medication isn't?
They were the first tool that we had available. Since then, we've had lots of other tools, but they haven't been recognised by case law, so they haven't made it into that model yet.
It's still recommended that condoms are used during sex to prevent other STIs, such as chlamydia and gonorrhea. Since the early 90s, at least 14 New Zealanders living with HIV have been prosecuted under the Crimes Act for not disclosing their status before sex. In 2009, there was a case where a person living with HIV intentionally infected 7 people with HIV by putting holes in the condoms that he used.
In that case, that's an appropriate place for this kind of law.
So far, no one has been prosecuted while also maintaining an undetectable viral load. But advocates worry that there is a real risk that someone living with HIV could be prosecuted if they don't disclose their status before having sex, even if they're undetectable.
It's the word intent, which is really important in this conversation, because most people don't want to infect other people. Most people living with HIV take medications to stay healthy themselves, and at that point they can't pass it on.
What advocates want is for antiviral medications, such as HIV treatment and PrEP, to be recognised as reasonable precaution the same way condoms are. Now, the traditional way for this change to occur is for a case to go through the courts and for a person living with HIV to be found not guilty because they were on treatment and undetectable. This would then set a precedent for future cases. But advocates say that if the government formally recognised the effectiveness of HIV treatment, then that could also be enough to make change.
For the individual, why do I have to disclose every single time I have sex when there is no risk of transmission? All I'm getting out of this is getting blocked and hate messages from people because they don't understand. And so every time I meet somebody, I have to do an education session on HIV for them.
There should be no fear, nothing to be scared of around HIV. It shows the lack of understanding.
A recent survey showed that only 10% of New Zealanders understand that people living with HIV can't pass on the virus if they're on medication, and 84% of New Zealanders are uncomfortable with the idea of having a sexual relationship with someone who is HIV positive. To the best of your guys' knowledge, how is HIV transmitted?
Isn't it transferred through saliva?
Only know as sexually.
I've heard you can get it from a toilet seat or something.
I'm suddenly just coming to terms with the fact that I don't know very much about HIV at all.
So you can't get HIV through saliva or kissing or anything like that.
Okay.
The main way people get HIV is through sex and through needle sharing. A survey found that over 1/3 of people living with HIV in New Zealand experienced HIV-related stigma in the past 12 months. Do you still experience stigma and misinformation around HIV?
I think it will always be part of HIV. For me, I would think the people that would affect, they would feel like they were being told, you're dirty. We need to protect people against you. And they feel lesser of a person.
HIV is the one that has the fear associated with it. Even within the gay community, where most HIV is in New Zealand, there's that irrational fear. Yeah.
Would you have condomless sex with someone living with HIV who was on treatment?
It doesn't really matter, as long as it's safe, everything's safe, then it's fine,
Would you expect them to first disclose their status to you before having sex with them?
I think it would be a respectful thing to do. I just think if there is information that could possibly influence someone's decision as to whether or not they have sex with you, it's probably best to be upfront.
It's not really any of my business, as far as I'm concerned.
Moralistically, for me, if I was in that scenario, I would have to. And for me, it's also an educating opportunity. But there will be those who are too scared to speak out.
Earlier this year, the government released an HIV action plan for the next 10 years, which aims to reduce HIV transmission and help end HIV stigma and misinformation. We reached out to Minister of Justice Kitty Allen for an interview. She responded with a statement saying, "I am aware that people living with HIV experience stigma and discrimination when dealing with the justice system. The action plan is needed as a priority to reduce stigma and discrimination." Is it possible to eliminate HIV transmission in New Zealand?
Yeah. If we get everybody to be on treatment, then there would be no more possibility to transmit HIV in New Zealand. We have condoms, we have PrEP, we have treatment. My big thing is get people tested and get them on treatment for their own health and to stop any transmission. And that should be an achievable goal. What we need to do is educate people, take away that fear, and make sure that sexual health is normalised. People have sex, they need to go and get tested.
I had never planned on growing old. I didn't think I would make 40, let alone 50, and I'm staring down the barrel at 60. So it's a wonderful life that little young man that came out 40 years ago could never have imagined. So I embrace it very much, and I'm very grateful for it. It's something I never thought I'd see.